Hello everyone, this is Sarfraz from Aristotle Prep and we are looking at passage 17 from the OG 13 RC chapter. This has questions 84 to 86. So first we will read the passage, try to understand it properly and then proceed to the questions. So the passage says, acting on the recommendation of a British government committee investigating the high incidence in white-led factories of illness among employees. Okay, understand this again. Somebody is acting on the recommendation of a British government committee, and what is the committee doing? The committee is investigating the high incidence in white-led factories of illness among employees, most of whom were women. The Home Secretary proposed, so the Home Secretary is acting on the recommendations of the committee. The committee is studying why is there a high incidence of cancer in white-led factories, especially among women. So acting on the recommendation of the committee, the Home Secretary proposed in 1895 that Parliament enact legislation that would prohibit women from holding most jobs in white-led factories. This is the recommendation of the Home Secretary. Although the Women's Industrial Defence Committee, formed in 1892 in response to earlier legislative attempts to restrict women's labour, did not discount the white-led trade's potential health dangers. So be clear again, WIDC was created in response to attempts to restrict women's labour, which is what's happening right now also. They are saying women cannot work in white-led factories, even though it is apparently for the benefit of the women, but this WIDC is coming into the picture because it is created to prevent restriction on women's labour. So WIDC, even though it did not discount the white-led trade's potential health dangers, it opposed the proposal, viewing it as yet another instance of limiting women's work opportunities. So now I think you understood why WIDC is opposing it. Though WIDC does agree that there is a danger to women of getting cancer in white-led factories. Okay. Also opposing the proposal was the Society for Promoting the Employment of Women, which attempted to challenge it by investigating the causes of illness in white-led factories. SPEW contended and WIDC concurred. Okay, they're both agreeing to something now. That controllable conditions in such factories were responsible for the development of lead poisoning. Whenever you read such sentences about two people or agencies agreeing upon something, most likely there will be a question about it. So what have they agreed upon? That the factors responsible for lead poisoning can be controlled. Okay, SPEW provided convincing evidence that lead poisoning could be avoided if workers were careful and clean, and if already extant workplace safety regulations were stringently enforced. Okay, this is only SPEW talking now. However, now a third agency is coming in, the Women's Trade Union League, which had ceased in the late 1880s to oppose restrictions on women's labour. It had stopped doing so, which means earlier it used to oppose such restrictions, but now WTUL had stopped opposing restrictions on women's labour. It supported the eventually enacted proposal. And what's the proposal? Proposal I think is by the Home Secretary recommendation that women should not be allowed to work in white-led factories. So WTUL supported the eventually enacted proposal in part because safety regulations were generally not being enforced in white-led factories. Okay, so women would keep getting cancer, where there were no unions to pressure employers to comply with safety regulations. So now we also know that white-led factories have no unions. So okay, a lot of data in this, and you saw that I was reading it, I was always trying to understand and stop at sentences and think, why is this happening and what does this mean? So if I recap the entire passage, there's a committee set up to investigate why women are getting cancer in white-led factories. And the committee recommended that stop women from working in white-led factories. WIDC has opposed that move, calling it unfair to women. SPEW has also opposed that move, and these agencies say that you can control the factors that lead to women getting cancer in white-led factories. There's a third agency now, WTUL, which is agreeing with the proposal that yes, ban women from working in these factories. The reason it's agreeing is because it believes that it's very difficult to enforce the safety regulations that the other two agencies spoke about earlier. So, okay, that's basically the passage for us. It wasn't particularly complicated. And three questions. We'll look at the first one. Before we look at the first one, the main purpose of the passage is absolutely neutral. It just describes something at one point in time. The author does not have any agenda, so it's a neutral passage. The question is, the passage suggests that WIDC differed from WTUL in which of the following ways? We'll have to see the option, but initially they were both created to oppose restrictions on women's labor, but WTUL is eventually doing the opposite. So let's look at the options. WIDC believed that the existing safety regulations were adequate to protect women's health, whereas WTUL believed that such regulations needed to be strengthened. That's absolutely wrong. WIDC wanted, I think, the regulations to be strengthened or implemented. WTUL thought it would never be implemented. So A is wrong. B says WIDC believed that unions could not succeed in pressuring employers. There was no union mentioned about WIDC anywhere, so I'm not confusing myself by reading anymore. C says WIDC believed that lead poisoning in white lead factories could be avoided. That's correct. By controlling conditions there, absolutely correct. Whereas WTUL believed that lead poisoning in such factories could not be avoided no matter how stringently safety regulations were enforced. The second part about WTUL is totally wrong, because WTUL did not believe that this could not be controlled or avoided. Their problem was that you would not be able to stringently enforce the safety regulation in the first place. But if you did somehow manage to do that, then I'm sure they would agree that yes, lead poisoning could be avoided. D says, at the time that the legislation concerning white lead factories was proposed, WIDC was primarily concerned with addressing health conditions in white lead factories, whereas WTUL was concerned with improving working conditions of all types of factories. I don't think so. So E is the answer. What does E say? At the time that WIDC was opposing legislative attempts to restrict women's labor, right, WTUL had already ceased to do so. That's absolutely correct. So WIDC was still opposing such attempts to restrict women's labor participation, but WTUL had actually stopped doing so, even though initially it was set up to do so. E should be definitely the answer to your question. And the disease in question is lead poisoning. I just noticed. I keep referring to it as cancer. It's actually apparently lead poisoning. Not that it makes any difference to our answer.